this is a tough spot following that panel, and I think standing between you guys and coffee or lunch, I'm not sure which one right now, but I'll try and make this a very quick run through some of the examples that we have been working on recently to leverage knowledge management for climate action, and how we've been thinking about evaluation, reflecting on our own theory of change, and what are better indicators of progress for trying to achieve accelerated climate action. And it was interesting that a lot of the panel discussions this morning have been about different types of measures, not just hard measures and looking at quantitative data, but also qualitative measures. And that's very similar in the KM experience that we have had through We Adapt and other tools we've developed, and through our work on co-production with stakeholders, which is also quite a big part of what we do at SEI. So I'm from SEI Oxford in the UK, and I've been there for too long, but I've been developing We Adapt for more than 10 years, and We Adapt has been around for about 16 years now. And we really see it as our responsibility to provide legacy beyond project lifetimes so that learning can continue about what works and what doesn't work. And it was interesting that that came up in the last panel. So I'd love to talk to you about ways that you guys can get involved in the platform to share the learning from the projects that you are coordinating and that your partners are working on. But hopefully we'll have more time later today. So I'm going to just rush through this. I know we have a dedicated breakout session later. So for those of you who don't know We Adapt, let me just go back a second. For those of you who don't know We Adapt, it's an online space for anyone to share knowledge on adaptation issues and relevant science. And so conservation and biodiversity and the things that are related to climate resilience are all relevant. But it's about sharing lessons learned in a standardized way. And this is something that we've had feedback on that our users have actually said is very useful. So the systematic approach to knowledge exchange enables the comparison and assessment of thousands of projects going on around the world facing similar challenges, and to learn about potential solutions and how challenges have been overcome. So this means enabling access to credible, high-quality information within the community, and particularly in We Adapt, one of our missions is to target and to enable access for marginalized groups or those from hard-to-reach areas. So very much our ethos is about amplifying voices in the Global South and those of indigenous and marginalized groups, and to facilitate knowledge exchange in a just and equitable way to ensure that users can learn from each other. So why did We Adapt come about, and what is the challenge that it's trying to address? So as we've heard today, we're all dealing with information overload, and that's not a new thing. But we're also working in silos, and information is fragmented and basically quite confusing for users, and it impedes our learning. And we don't have easy ways to share this information to maximize impact and visibility. We recognized this quite early on in our own climate change adaptation work and knowledge sharing work many years ago. And the danger of replication and redundancy across projects and initiatives, and the lack of learning about what good practice actually looks like, and what experience is already out there, and what doesn't work, was really important to share. So we have lots of lessons that we've learned over 16 years about what works in knowledge management and what doesn't, why people share information and why they don't. And we are building on those lessons every day. So we continually respond to feedback from users. I work with a technical team daily, and we are constantly responding to stakeholder feedback. So for example, we give small CBOs the same visibility for their knowledge that they share as an international research institute or an NGO to make sure the accreditation is there. And we found in the early days that that was a big problem. So in a nutshell, We Adapt a platform that helps you learn about new and relevant resources. It allows you to share your own work, and it allows you to connect with others, peers who are working on the similar issues. It's about accelerating learning and knowledge exchange, as I've said. And it's also about collaborating directly and building networks with others who are working on the same things that maybe you don't know about. So one of the things that we aim to do is to increase connectivity of platforms as well. And I'm going to come back to this later. But for now, I just want to emphasize the fact that We Adapt is free, it's open, it's free for all to share. It increases the discoverability of content. We also do a lot of research on how to make content discoverable through our work on taxonomies and standardization. And we are trying to be very inclusive of all voices, and Indigenous knowledge is a core part of what we're hoping to enable the sharing of. So, are we doing things right? A big part of our work this year has really been trying to evaluate what we're doing well and what we can improve. We were established in 2007, so we're one of the longest running platforms of its kind online, global platform on adaptation, that is. And our audience grows year on year. We have more than 160,000 unique visits from more than 200 countries and territories. But we do all the things that you would expect a platform to do to see if we're doing things right. We measure our users, we do all the analytics and so on. But that's not really the whole story, as I'm sure everybody here knows, and I'm going to come back to that later. There are some of the stats. So I think I've covered this already, but I just want to emphasize that increasing the visibility of your work and the work of your organizations and your partners and your networks is really core to what we do. And we do that from regional to local to global levels. We try to link work that's not directly related to adaptation we make the links to adaptation, so work on conservation and Indigenous knowledge and climate resilience generally is all accepted on the platform. And relevant themes here, for example, are we have a whole theme and actually a whole microsite, which I'll come back to later, on adaptation in mountain regions. And we also have the same for adaptation without borders and looking at transboundary adaptation. So this is a really flexible platform. We constantly also respond to needs about new themes that we should be having or new areas of research that are not reflected on the platform. So just to very quickly go over this, these are our themes at the moment. These are emerging and organic and in response to users' needs. These are networks that are emerging. We have a range of articles and case studies on the platform. So this is our case study map showing projects going on all over the world. But we also try and that's an example of a case study. So we include stories of the projects that have been implemented. And we try and do this in a standardized way. So as was mentioned earlier, sharing lessons learned in a systematized format is really important. But because a lot of the content we share is qualitative, it's not quantitative data, we also have to try and create a flexible yet robust interface for people to try and share content systematically. So we provide recommendations on types of content to put in that little summary there around the methodology used, the lessons learned, and key messages, but we are also flexible there, so we don't enforce any sort of structure in a mandatory way. But that systematization is what users find very useful because you can then compare projects, thousands of projects across the world. The orange dots here are also climate information, so we also try and support locally led development of climate analysis, and we provide lots of guidance on this, and that's the same for all content on the platform. So very quickly, this is, again, coming back to a bit of the structure, and the key thing I want to mention here, because we're going to come back to it later, are keywords. So keywords or tags are absolutely essential for connecting knowledge in the current digital world, and it's surprising how badly all platforms do at this job. I'll just skip through this very quickly. We also have a lot of capacity development resources, and importantly here, we also share content in over 130 languages, I think. Using Google Translate, I have to admit, but I think it's getting better. So we also accept content in any language, and you can translate it then to any language. So we're really excited to have more work from this region. But then the question is, are we doing the right things? So we've been doing this for a long time, and we needed to do some evaluation of what's working well and what's not. And in order to sort of figure out whether we're doing the right things as opposed to things right, we conducted a survey. And this is an impact story map to understand better whether we are doing the right things and whether there's a demand or an unmet need in the community for what we're trying to achieve. The survey was great. It provided lots of useful input, and I encourage you to have a look at this map that's online that provides those stories. But we also wanted to understand better what the right things are. And to do that, we couldn't just use the survey, we had to do interviews. So we wanted to understand where our focus and priorities should be in the coming years to improve the platform, particularly because we're actually going through an upgrade process right now and transitioning to WordPress. So in January, we'll be launching a new platform. So to do this, we conducted a series of in-depth interviews, and we visualized some of those insights on the impact story map. And a lot of what people were telling us were that the highlights were that we are able to raise awareness and promote adaptation practice through the platform. There is a degree of capacity development and training going on through the platform. It's supporting planning and implementation, and it's helping to foster new connections. So in this area, there was a lot of, coming back to our theory of change, we didn't think about raising awareness as something that we should measure as an indicator of effectiveness, because we were more thinking about, are we practically making a difference? And also, how do you measure raising awareness? But the interviews did tell us that increasing awareness and supporting youth and adults in learning about climate change in a variety of sectors and contexts was really key, and it was happening. And it was reported that the platform's actually just helping people just stay up to date with the fast-moving world of adaptation as well. Around capacity development and training, we make a really conscious attempt to make our information accessible in a synthesized and easy-to-digest format using accessible language. And this also came through very much in interviews. And members said that they were using it for training with local communities, with farmer groups and students, with internally displaced people, women and girls, in high schools and youth engagement camps and so on. So this was really exciting for us to learn, but it's not something that we were necessarily measuring. Around planning and implementation, this is obviously something that's part of our vision and our goal, and helping people learn from cases. And people did say that having the wide geographic spread of WeAdapt's content allowed a huge degree of exchanging of lessons learned, and this was really valued. We had, for example, a high school teacher in Tanzania telling us that the ideas that came from the WeAdapt newsletter on afforestation and reforestation and organic farming were really helping to develop new projects in his village, and he was inspired to continue doing that and move into aquaculture as well. So this was something that we were really unaware of from our newsletter, which is another source of social media that we send out regularly. And then in terms of fostering connections, interviews did report that both directly and indirectly this was having an impact. And even in areas where there's poor connectivity, and our focus is on the global south, even with constraints there, we had stories where people were telling us they were printing out our newsletter and sharing it with their community offline, to, again, increase awareness and get buy-in for local community projects. So there are some core values that we try and operate by that contribute to this, we think, and our next task is to think about what these indicators should be to capture these kind of impacts, to update our theory of change, and we're also developing recommendations for other platforms on the value of this kind of regular qualitative evaluation, which we wouldn't have got otherwise if we'd have just done a survey or just looked at analytics and so on. So there are lots of ways you guys can get involved in WeAdapt, to share your work, to share the work of your partners and the projects that you're funding. And we're really there to support you in doing that. We're there to offer training. We can provide training to you or your partners to help achieve that. I very quickly want to also share with you a different way that we are helping to build knowledge sharing capacity when knowledge needs to be shared on a platform online with its own branding and with its own look and feel, and you can't just put it on WeAdapt, which is free. So we've developed something called microsites, which build on top of WeAdapt technology, so they're very low cost and very efficient to create, but they can take advantage of the existing technology we have, the interface, but more importantly, our content that already exists, say on forests or disasters, and our membership base. So these are some screenshots of 6 or 7 microsites we've had in the past or are currently developing and are online. This is one on transboundary adaptation. And then we also have some that use our maps interface. So I'll just go through this very quickly. But what I wanted to show you here is that we also have one on adaptation in mountains through our Adaptation Altitude project, which is a project supported by the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, working with partners in, which includes actually Condesan working here in Peru and in Ecuador. And this is, again, an example of a knowledge-sharing mechanism that's required, but has slightly different demands. And here, again, responding to user needs, a different content type was needed here. So we created a solutions portal for this Adaptation in Mountains project, with solutions being a type of content that we don't currently have, but recognizing that that was something that needed to be shared. And then lastly, because today we've heard a lot about knowledge management and we've heard about multiple great platforms as well that are out there, I also want to share a project where we are trying to connect knowledge across platforms where there is a necessity to have these platforms in existence anyway. So here is something called the Connectivity Hub. It was developed to support communities in adaptation and disaster risk reduction come together, collaborate, and communicate better. And it really was trying to address this problem of silos and these communities not working together. So it incorporates information from these 6 platforms that you see on the left at the moment. And it involved a lot of stakeholder consultation about what wasn't working in terms of information access and what people needed. The big thing that came up through this consultation was that language is a huge problem. The same terminology is used differently by different communities, and this obviously can lead to maladaptation or differences in practice. And so this is how the Placard Connectivity Hub came about. And it sort of emerged because all platforms, whether they use them well or not, do usually have tags and keywords. So this orange node that you can see in the middle here is a tag, and the blue nodes are projects that have been shared by platforms, and they have tagged their projects with this particular tag. And then in We Adapt particularly, we also have organizations that are connected to projects. And so the green nodes here are organizations. So what this allows you to do is to see the landscape of who's doing what on DRR and adaptation, and this could be extended to any sort of community or communities of practice. And it allows you to also understand what the language is that is being used in those communities. So if you have a tag for nature-based solutions, and it has an alternative label, or it has synonyms associated with it, or the adaptation community uses it differently to the DRR community, you can also incorporate that data in there. So in terms of systematization of data, this is why this is important. And this is leading into our work on taxonomies. So we are looking at all the taxonomies that already exist out there and trying to build on what works well and what already exists. This is an example of taking the IPCC glossaries that are now very nicely connected together in a glossary and trying to address gaps there around very niche areas, like mountain adaptation, for example, and then trying to make these connections. And this is not another platform. This is actually just a widget, you can call it, that will take you to the source platform, which is the button there. It will show you a summary of the content and take you to the source platform. And so this can be really beneficial for cross-fertilizing audiences as well. So if you have an adaptation person who wouldn't necessarily go to the UNDRR platform to find something, but maybe would find it there, this is an example of achieving that. And so this is just to show you that platforms do have tags, but they are not systematized in any way usually. And lastly, just to say that the example I was talking about earlier, if you do have terms that have alternative labels, or when we're talking about indigenous knowledge and when we're talking about local knowledge particularly, there are terms that are used differently, and you can really take advantage of the technological advances that we have now to create these synonyms and alternative labels. And then you can, do a smart search. So if you have nature-based approaches up there, which is an alternative to nature-based solutions, the system can also suggest to you other terms that you should be looking at. And when you're learning about a new area or a topic that you're not familiar with, having the system suggest terms to you is incredibly important. And again, you can have scope notes, which is explaining how communities will use these terms differently. So again, we're not trying to impose a term or a taxonomy or a terminology on any community, but we're just trying to raise awareness about how terms are used differently. And you can obviously go back to the source data to find out where this came from. So as I said, this is not another platform. This is just trying to cross-fertilize learning, reduce these silos and this information overload, and reduce the fragmentation that we talked about at the beginning. So there's a few resources there if you're interested in finding out more about the Connectivity Hub. We've just produced a couple of videos. And I think that's all I wanted to say about that. But please come and find me later if you're interested in any of these tools or platforms, and I'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you.